So good afternoon, everybody. We're going to talk today about powerful personal statements. If you have a question, put it in the chat and we will revisit questions at the end. This is a pretty comprehensive presentation. I do cover a lot, so buckle up and let's talk a little bit about personal statements for applying to medical school. So why are personal statements required? Admissions committees want to know your motivation. Why do you want to be a physician? We're interested in your background, a little bit about who you are, the experiences that you've engaged in trying to prepare for this journey of becoming a physician. We assess through your writing a little bit of your communication skills, how clearly you're able to express ideas. We get an overall impression and kind of feel for you as an applicant. And of course, we're looking for that all-important aspect of mission fit. So do the goals and aspirations that you have for medicine meet the kind of medical education program that we're offering? Do we see that you would potentially be a student that would thrive in our environment and also add to what we're hoping to accomplish with our mission? So the purpose of a personal statement is to get an interview. So you really need to keep that in mind as you're looking at your work. The reason why we talk about it needs to be engaging, all these things, is because the goal of it is to make the reader want to meet you in person, to make the reader want to know more about you, to share enough about yourself so that you stand out and you don't appear to be this sort of generic pre-med cookie cutter clone, but an interesting individual that we would want to have a conversation with and explore our school's mission, our goals in medicine by speaking with you. The most common mistake is what I call the meaningless donut. So we all love donuts. They are delicious. These look particularly tasty. But in the world of personal statements, we do not want any donuts. We do not want the meaningless donut, which is to begin by summarizing the experiences that have motivated you to become a doctor and to summarize those experiences, and then to conclude by saying that those experiences are the reason why you chose to become a doctor. So essentially, I love science, I really had fun in my biology class, and I did some research, I volunteered in a clinic, I talked with doctors, I'm really interested in this career. So the personal statement ends up being, I did a bunch of things because I want to be a doctor. And the conclusion is, I want to be a doctor because I did all these things. And you never actually get to the why. You never really show us who you are and how the experiences you've engaged are related to your goals and motivations for medicine. So we don't want the endless loop of, here's what I did because I want to be a doctor, and I want to be a doctor because these are the things I did. So there's a fine line here in writing your personal statement where we'd like your writing to be confident, right? But you don't want to come across as self-centered or arrogant. We want you to be aware of your strengths and limitations and sufficiently humble, but not self-centered or disparaging of yourself. We need good details around what you're describing, but we don't want the focus to be too grainy or too broad. We hope that you stand out in a good way, which also sort of walks that fine line of being a little bit too weird. And then, of course, we want you to be honest, but we want you to share things that are relevant to your journey and motivation, and you don't want to do the sort of too much information or tell us things that could detract from your candidacy. So some strategies here that we'll talk about are the scope, the focus, content, style, and theme. So a framework around writing your personal statement can definitely help. And I will say that a personal statement is an event over the course of your preparation, but it is a process. It is not necessarily just something that you're going to sit down and do once. It's an evolving process of self-awareness and how you come to express your motivation for medicine as your profession. So I really recommend beginning early. Journal and catalog experiences that you have where you are surprised, where you are disappointed, where you are elated, where you experience great joy. I mean, these are really good things to pay attention to in your preparation. I recommend creative writing or writing letters to someone else, reflecting on your experiences through writing exercises, and also leisure reading. Read about the things that you're curious about. Read about the things about which you're passionate. So those begin to inform your ideas and reflections that you have, the meaning that you make of the world around you. So the why is really the most important part. We don't want you to be an observer of your own experience and tell us the things that you did, right? Like that sort of goes in the experiences portion of your application. Well, I went to, I volunteered in a pediatric emergency room and I dressed up in costumes and I made all the kids laugh. It was so much fun. But I really want to know why you did those things and what did that experience mean to you? And what did that experience mean in the context of what was happening to those children receiving medical treatment and in healthcare? How have you thought about the lives of those children in the clinic, outside the clinic, in the emergency room, outside the emergency room? So the meaning making part of reflecting about your experiences requires that effort and attention that you are in your own story, that you're not just telling us the things that you did and that they felt good, that you're not reporting, you're making meaning. The best way to really show, the best way to tell a committee who you are is to really show it. And so rather than reporting, again, I have good people skills, you can show it by describing the people skills that you have, right? So this is just an example. When I walk into the room, I take time to notice body language and facial expressions of patients and those accompanying them. I've learned not to assume that everyone is comfortable or willing to speak with me, right? How do you do this stuff? And this is a really important technique in discussing. Applicants often claim they really care about serving underserved communities. They really are interested in working with XYZ population. But your personal statement should show me how you've done that and the things you've learned from doing that, the insights that you have gained in working with vulnerable patients, how you will approach healthcare differently. If you enjoy connecting with patients, tell me how you connect with patients. Tell me why that is important to you, or the role that you think patient connection plays in healthcare outcomes or patient satisfaction or patient trust, for example. So you really want to have a good focus on your story so that it doesn't come across really general. Personal statements that, you could change a couple words, you can make a few names different, it could be somebody else's personal statement. That is not going to be personal enough to really make someone invested in meeting you. So you do want to have a specific focus for your writing, not just a big generic summary, again, of the things that you've done or a couple of things that are important to you. So you want to tell your story with your theme or message and from your point of view. So you don't need to use third person. One would think, one might assume. We know it's you. You can just say I. Use present tense for your motivations and past tense for experiences. And do not try to squeeze in so much that you sacrifice detail. So sometimes you'll begin the pre-writing process and there'll be a lot that you really want to say. I recommend keeping everything throughout your writing process, and as you reduce down to what you're going to put in your, say, AMCAS personal statement, you keep some other writing stems and seeds that might come up later as you're asked in secondaries or supplemental applications or scholarship essays, for example, other ways of making meaning of experiences that you might have chosen not to include because they were just outside the scope of the focus that you decided to take for this essay. A writing style is very personal. You don't have to write like an academic to have a successful personal statement. But I will say we do want it to be interesting. We would like for you to use adjectives that describe and allow the reader to understand your experiences, but not overly gratuitous. I once read a personal statement that opened up like describing the scene of an accident in a really kind of gory CSI sort of way, and that doesn't make me want to read more. That doesn't make me want to meet the person. I don't know them, so I'm not sure why they're using, such disturbing adjectives to describe the gore and the carnage of something that was quite tragic. I would say be careful with poetry or stylistic choices that detract from you. Be careful using quotes from other people. In general, this is your story and your words to tell. And so opening with someone else's words, my bias is that I tend to sort of cringe and wonder what's coming next if you're opening your story with someone else's words. Again, I do think we need to be descriptive and we need to show the reader our qualities, not just tell, but you do not have to do this in a really creative writing kind of narrative format. If that suits you and you feel that you want to include something of that essence, play around with it and see. but quotes and sounds sometimes can disengage the reader because we sort of wonder if this is going to seriously tell us why the person wants to be a physician and who they are as an individual. So you can find ways to tie your ideas together with a theme. You can use an analogy or an allegory. You can give sort of an autobiography and talk about sort of your life from a certain point in time up to another point in time. You can use a vignette of an experience that you've had, or a time you failed, or a patient interaction to sort of get at a theme. But overall, we really want you to choose something that's unique. And being able to write a unique personal statement means that you've engaged your preparation as a future physician from your unique standpoint of your own identity, passions, and the things that you care about. So another way to say that is if you're following a checklist and you just sort of went through and you checked off things that other people told you were supposed to do to have a competitive med school application, when it comes time to write your personal statement, you will have much more difficulty creating meaning from those experiences if in fact you did them because other people told you to or you thought you should, rather than here's the justice that I care about in the world. Here are the causes that are important to me. These are the things that I love to do. I love music. I love soccer. I love cooking. Like, choose things that you're passionate about that make the world around you better, so that when it comes to writing about those things and why you did them, they will be connected to your true identity, and that will come through in your personal statement. Too much information. It's very tricky. I will say that I have seen every rule broken in TMI and personal statements. I've seen applicants be incredibly vulnerable in discussing trauma or difficulties, mental health, physical health, all sorts of things. Again, it's the genuineness that really has to come through for this, and you really have to get a lot of feedback from other people to make sure that your message is coming across. So sharing these types of weighty issues, they really need to be relevant to your motivation for medicine. So just sharing them because you feel that because you went through something hard, we should let you into medical school, it needs to be tied to your why. It needs to be resolved. So we can't be wondering if you still have cancer or if you're still working through severe trauma. We need to feel in the tone of the essay and in the way that you describe how it relates to your motivation that there's resolution. You need to draw in strengths and gains from that hardship that will benefit you on this journey moving forward, not just talk about suffering. And you do want to be personally comfortable discussing this issue. If you put it in your personal statement, it is fair game for any interviews that are open interviews. Therefore, if you do not want to talk about something, or you feel that you're going to lose your composure, you might start crying if you think about it too much, really step back and ask, is this the right place to be discussing this part of my motivation or experience if in an interview I would not feel comfortable discussing this aspect of my experience or identity or my why. So for the content, again, tell your story versus listing experiences. Do not list experiences. Make it interesting. Do not name accomplishments and awards. Do not discuss your GPA or that you're an honor student. We see those other things in the other areas of your application. We see your grades. We see if you listed awards as part of your experiences, we see what awards you've received. Do not repeat content from elsewhere in your application. So if you wrote a little mini essay for your most meaningful experience, do not cut and paste that exact portion and put it into your personal statement. If you still want to write about another meaningful experience from that same, like maybe you volunteered at a food bank and you worked a lot with families, like helping them do personal shopping for their dietary needs at a food bank, and you wrote a little vignette about that as most meaningful, you could still talk about that experience in your personal statement, but it needs to be integrated in original writing. Otherwise, you just look lazy, and it's really bad to sort of know that you're competing with a lot of people to get into medical school and take shortcuts. We easily see where you've taken shortcuts if you do that. Do not criticize others. Do not, the other people that you might be talking about are not present to defend themselves or present their perspective. I often see applicants trying to walk this fine line of having witnessed bad physician behavior and wanting to say, I'm going to go into medical school. I want to go to medical school because I think I can be a better doctor than this person that I witnessed get it wrong. that is a very tricky lens, because the people who are reading your application, a large portion of them are going to be physicians or medical students, and they may have a different view of a clinical environment, or may imagine why they might have done the same thing, or a lot of reasons that aren't within a person who's shadowing, for example, not within that person's view about what could be happening. If you criticize lawyers and say, lawyers are the reason why healthcare is so expensive and they're just terrible, ambulance chasers. Well, I might have someone in my inner circle who's an attorney. I might know someone who really helps patients recuperate healthcare costs and avoid healthcare bankruptcy by dealing with insurance companies or healthcare entities, for example. So be very cautious in criticizing other people directly. You can say what you feel needs to be improved. You can talk about what you would like to see. You can talk about the disparities or people without care without specifically saying this XYZ person or entity is the reason why it's bad. And do not put yourself down. We need you to be confident and resilient, and talking about yourself in a disparaging way does not belong in your personal statement. We want you to be grammatically correct. There are always a few people on the committee who are super sticklers for grammar and punctuation and neatness. Those are probably the people that care more about your room clean than other people, but they're voters on the committee. So if it's something that you can control, you should make it grammatically correct. Make it passionate and powerful. If you can teach the reader something about yourself or about the world, that is always a really wonderful tool to engage the reader and be very memorable. The personal statements and interviews that I've discussed, these wonderful applicant stories and growth experiences, I have really loved and remembered them for years to come. I once talked to an applicant who was a solo mountaineer. So she would go on these hikes and these very long climbs by herself, backpack all her gear, camp at different summits, and she had done several peaks. And she wrote her personal statement about a time that she was doing a very difficult climb and got sick and realized that she needed to go back down. She needed to take all day and hike back down to a sheltered area that was kind of like a cave inlet in the mountain to rest so she could really make it to the top. And so she talked about, her insight around accepting her limitations, that, sometimes moving backwards is moving forward. Sometimes we have to accept people where they are, that their limitations are not who they are. And it was such a powerful story. I learned a lot from even just talking with her. And the personal statement made me want to interview her. And I really enjoyed that conversation, moving forward. So we want to get to know you. We want to hear your goals and ideas. Those are the elements of the personal statement that help us decide whether you really are going to be a great mission fit for our schools. Your opening paragraph should draw the reader in, should give us an idea of where you're going and the kinds of ideas that you're going to be sharing with us. Don't just sort of open it up with some sounds. I was riding in the back of a truck. It was going to be a great day. Then I'm like, okay, I just read 5 sentences and I still have no idea where this person is going. So very quickly, you need to take us to the thesis of what your passion and purpose is in medicine, or what the theme of your personal statement is going to be. For your opening sentences, again, you want to get your essay read. So if it's boring at the beginning and I just start skimming, I may not read it very carefully. I may not get to the most important ideas until the very end. And if I've already bailed, then it's going to be harder for you to get noticed and to get an interview. So you want to draw the reader in and engage and sustain that interest so that the reader continues to engage in the ideas that you're trying to get across to us about your candidacy for our school. In the body of the essay, you can expand on your theme. Pay attention to transitions. Don't just switch ideas. You want consistency of voice and tone. So if you are talking about a very serious subject, you don't want to make lighthearted comments or lighthearted commentary about some of the things that you're learning. You definitely, like I said, can use I. Those are all important strategies for conveying your ideas and telling your story. Again, we want you to show and describe what you want to share about yourself. So if you're going to talk about being flexible, if you're going to talk about the role of language in connecting with patients, I was working with one of our medical students, fourth year, on his personal statement, and he was talking about how he feels that he's a good fit for this specialty because he grew up, working on projects in a hotel that their family owned. And so he had to sort of learn how to adapt and figure out, you know, how to do plumbing or how to do carpet or how to do various aspects of maintenance. So one really great way would be sort of to describe maybe the breadth of projects in a given week that would have to be done in this hotel work, to then transition into, this is how I learned to not be afraid to figure things out, right? And that's a much more vivid picture of, I'm a person that can just sort of jump in and figure something out. Let me tell you why I know that. Let me describe my experiences that will help you come to the conclusion, wow, this applicant really does, is really flexible. This applicant seems very compassionate. This applicant seems really reflective about their goals and purpose in medicine. You want to use these tools of reflection. The questions are, what did I learn from this? How did I change? How did I grow? How or what did I overcome? What did I fail? How did I fail? What surprised me? Again, what upset me or brought me joy? Really digging into the meaning making of those experiences is going to be important in showing growth. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have some wild, dramatic experience in order to impress the committee. We just want to know, importantly, some of the lessons that you have learned and how you've grown and changed in your process. That allows us to gauge maturity, which I think is another goal for committees in asking you to do this writing, is we want to understand where you are in life in terms of your own ability to take feedback, to accept failure, and to engage in difficult things. Medical school is going to be hard. And so one area of the application that we really want to make sure that you've engaged in preparation-wise is you're resilient in your ability to overcome challenges. We want you to analyze the meaning making that you do. So again, how does this relate to your values or the reasons why you decided to go into medicine? What were the challenges? Are there things that are unresolved or ambiguous or difficult? That's okay. In terms of maybe you don't have all the answers for healthcare access challenges. Maybe you don't have all the answers for working with patients who are struggling with, lack of access to food or language barriers. And then how do your experiences relate to the social system, social identities, and stratifications that are out there in society? So if you come from a background where you are up close and personal to some of these challenges, describe those challenges. Describe what you know about how patients address those barriers, or what would make it better to address barriers for those patients from those backgrounds. One example would be understanding the role of poverty in an individual's ability to answer their phone, right? So not everybody has unlimited minutes on their phone. Certain phone plans are very different. Some people frequently use disposable phones and can't afford a plan. So is text messaging a better way to communicate with people who may not have a continuity of a home phone or a reliable cell phone plan? It may be important to continually ask at each appointment for someone's phone number because their phone number might change, right? These would be insights that someone might gather having worked with populations of individuals that struggle with access to technology and resources and connectivity due to poverty. So sharing those insights about, here's what I saw when I was there. As I did this work, these are the things that I noticed. This relates to my values because I want to be one of those people that advocates for important changes that are much more patient-centered, that listen and that adapt how we deliver care so that it works for people from all walks of life, for example. Please don't be generic. I have read thousands of personal statements, and some of them make me want to stab my eyes out. And most of the time, it's not because they're bad, it's because they're just not specific, right? Everybody likes to write about, I like helping people, or I love science, I want to serve my community. Yay, I feel so good inside when I help, right? I'm a people person, or I'm a puzzles and adventure person, or a problem solver. I, walked out of the womb knowing I wanted to be a physician. So these are all really great themes, but you've got to give me something very personal to attach to this type of theme in order to make it interesting and in order to make me want to meet you. Again, do not say negative things about others. Do not get so far off the topic that you talk all about a person that you admire or an experience that you had and it doesn't really center enough around medicine. Don't introduce or talk about things that you don't know anything about, even if it's something that you're curious about or something that you are interested in. If you don't have expertise in that area, do not put it in your application, or you will seem like you are reaching or trying to use buzzwords, or you might be asked about it in an interview and not be able to respond effectively. And again, do not introduce topics that you don't want people to know beyond your application. You really want to show authenticity in this. The personal statement really helps the rest of your application come alive and kind of helps us get a feel for who you are, how you've spent your time, and what you've learned in those experiences that you've engaged. So we want to know that you can understand and communicate with people who are different from you. So does your personal statement communicate that? We want to see that you've challenged yourself. We want to hear how you've learned and grown, and we really want you to write from your own perspective. So in that sense, I would recommend not using colonized language. Describe your community in your own words, not in the way that you think an academic reader would want to describe it. So if you come from XYZ town, say you come from XYZ town and describe your town. Don't say I come from a divested community that's been victimized by gentrification, or using this language. Often we say like communities that are underserved or predominantly XYZ, but think about how you talk about your community as a member of it will help really pull that authenticity through. You really want to show skills, growth, and identity to come across and convey your authenticity. So again, skills and ability to work with others. Growth, can you accept feedback, adapt, and be resilient? And of course, your identity around being yourself and the experiences that you've engaged en route to even beginning to construct your personal statement have a lot to do with all three of these things. So if you sit down and you really find yourself unable to move forward, perhaps it's time to step back and engage a different set of experiences that will get you closer to being able to connect who you are as a person with this dream of becoming a physician. In the conclusion, wrap it up nicely. Do not introduce new ideas or concepts. Make it a powerful ending that really gives us the punch for your theme or for your ideas. Don't just repeat a bunch of things that you've already said, but really actively close off those ideas with a final message. Do not use hashtags, texting, slang, abbreviations. Do not write in another language or use incorrect translation. If you're going to quote something in another language, please make sure that it's absolutely correct. Do not put a teaser in like the 4th grade book report. Do not put links to your YouTube channel or your Etsy store. Definitely do not write about how great Dr. So-and-so is, or we are going to want to interview them for medical school and not you. Research is generally pretty boring, so it requires a lot more context than you can usually provide in the space that you have. So most of the time, the research jargon is not that interesting and doesn't really add that much to your overall goal or meaning making of what you're doing. So if you're going to talk about it, it needs to have an important point besides just summarizing the research that you did. You have to decide if the detail is really necessary. So I've read a couple of really beautiful personal statements about research that actually were more about an analogy of the project. So one of my students actually did research on the songs of finches and how the unique songs of finches help them communicate with their offspring and help them find home. So the student actually talked about the research that she did and some of the findings that they discovered through this wildlife research, but also about her learning to listen to her own voice and her feeling called to medicine. It was a super beautiful personal statement, very unique and obviously memorable all these years later. So if you're going to include research, it needs to have a purpose in your theme and your motivation for medicine. If you're applying to MD, PhD, then of course your research essay should be about your research passions and interests and how you've engaged those. But these really grainy descriptions really belong in the experiences section describing the research that you've done as you've listed as a research experience. So if you're going to write about research, just my quick tip about this is to really begin with the field or the area that you're in, and then narrow it down to the purpose and then describing exactly what you did, and then come back out and talk about the implications and the study's potential, and then relate it back to the field and talk about insert insight that you may have gained. So an example would be, I did research in cardiology. That's the larger area. The purpose of this was to study how long tissues could survive without oxygen, right? So this is sort of to mimic conditions of cardiac events so that we can learn more about the way that the rest of the body responds to a lack of oxygen. So my role was to induce various intervals of oxygen deprivation in animal models, and then to count the cells that were still alive at time intervals across these tissue resections and stains. So in being able to catalog the tissue death, quantify tissue death at various time intervals and various forms of oxygen deprivation, we're hoping to understand protocol for treating cardiac events, and this could eventually inform not only new pharmaceutical interventions, but also public health policies around how far people might be able to live from a trauma center, for example, or how long is too long of an ambulance ride if someone is suffering from oxygen deprivation. What can we do to prevent the loss of important muscle function that can result from cardiac events, especially in communities that are not proximal to trauma centers? Right? So give a little bit of this idea of what exactly you did and how it plays into what you're investigating and the hypothesis of your research. So I encourage you to write and do the process. So writing, and rewriting. It is a process, not an event, as I've said. It's okay to end up something different, end up with something completely different than your original idea. So you want to get some outside opinions, you want to have people evaluate it. I do recommend that you use the line test, which is ask someone that you don't know to read it. And if they decide at any point that it's just kind of boring and not interesting, ask them to draw a line across the page or write a line across the page, a big dash, and then just send it back to you. And that you'll know sort of where the reader might have failed and what ideas are above the line and what ideas are below the line. Be meticulous about the typos and the grammar, and really write toward your purpose of sharing your story and wanting a committee to want to meet you. And have fun telling your story and talking about the preparation that you've engaged to get to this point. So some common questions. What if I'm a career changer? How do I write about that? It's wonderful to have another career to talk about. I think it's best to write about it in terms of what you want more from medicine. I was actually just reading a personal statement about someone who has a career as a pharmacist and is interested in going to medical school. So I'm really focusing on, here are the things that I love about my current career, and this is what I want to do more of and through medicine, and really understanding kind of the difference between the two. So it's better to always sort of write it as more of a positive spin of wanting more from medicine, but it's certainly okay to talk about having a different career. We consider that to be a strength. If you really want to do something ultra specific in medicine, like being a forensic pathologist where you investigate, why people died and you examine dead bodies all day, is it okay to write about that? We do need you to write about medicine in a way that helps us feel secure that you're interested in working with live patients until you get all the way through the generic or the general rotations of medical school in the requisite areas, and then you don't really get to specialize until halfway through your fourth year. And then in residency, of course, you get to choose your specialty. So it's okay to write about exposure to something specific like forensic pathology or plastic surgery or ophthalmology, but we want to know that you're in love with medicine writ large. If you think that you only want to go to medical school to do this one specific thing, we worry because so many of our students change their minds once they get in. So you can write about it, but still be open-minded in how you convey your passion for medicine as a larger profession. If your exposure comes from taking care of people that you know, I think that's okay. Again, what are the insights that you've gained? What are the things that it has taught you? We do still expect you to understand medicine and how it works in a larger context. But if insights have come from your personal illness or injury, as well as someone that you love, that's okay, as long as you're able to reflect on it and make meaning of it. And if you're interested in working with the community that you don't have experience in, can you write about it? No. Do not write about experiences outside of your own wheelhouse, because that will take away from the authenticity of your application, especially if we look at all your experiences and you have nothing to do with the communities you wrote about, and then in your essay you write about those communities. We are very confused as a committee, and it just doesn't go together. We want everything in the application to be relational, so that as we weave this picture of you, it makes sense. So if there's too many parts that just don't go together, the committee often is very confused by that. A lot of these questions around identity and life circumstances, challenges are very common for personal statements. Can I talk about any of these things? Applicants will often say. I always say it depends. It depends on how they are related to your motivation for medicine, firstly. And secondly, if you want to go to a school that would hold those things against you, right? So obviously there's a lot of people involved in an admissions process that don't represent the school writ large. So I think, you know, keep in mind that you can play it a little closer to, you can not be as revealing in your personal statement, but then as you engage the interview process or maybe talk to current students, you can explore other aspects of your identity as it might intersect with the institution, and I think that's fine. But ultimately, if this is something that's important to you, it's a huge part of who you are. Being yourself in the application process will increase the likelihood that you'll end up at a school where you'll really be able to thrive. So again, is it related to your motivation for medicine? If it is, really consider if you want to go to a school that doesn't value that, not just tolerate those things about you, but value those things about you. So now we'll have some time for questions from all of you. Let me just stop sharing and we will go to the questions. I saw the chat was like indicating while I was sharing my screen, but I didn't see it. So Esmeralda, could you read the question? Yeah.
Yes. Thanks. So I have one question that was sent to me. Let me just scroll up a little bit. So is it appropriate to say that you've done things that are on your resume, like the steps that you've taken to get into medical school, as opposed to why you want to become a doctor?
Your personal statement is not the place to report on what you did. It's the place to report on why you did those things. So obviously you might say, I've been volunteering at Al Shifa Clinic for the last year, right? And there I work with patients and these are the things I do, and you might describe a little bit of your work. I still need to know why that's important, what you've learned. What did that mean to you to do that? How does that experience fit into what you care about, who you are, and why you're motivated to become a physician? So you can contrast that into, with your experiences, you're really writing about who you worked with, what that entailed, what the deliverables or accomplishments were, you know, describing to us the skills that you've used in that experience, whether you coordinated or organized or fundraised, or, you know, really giving us a picture of what you accomplished. And in your personal statement, it's who are you and why did you do this? Why do you want to be a physician?
One of the other questions was your slides, if you would, or if you're going to be sharing them, and I'm going to share the recording. So it's up to you, Sunny, if you want me to share any slides, or we can just do the recording.
Yes, I will have my son edit this and post it on my channel, because I've been trying to like do more PowerPoint tutorials on my channel. And it took him like 9 hours to do the last one, but I think he's getting a little faster. So we'll have him edit this like with the voiceover on the slides, and then we'll just post that portion. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Who would be the best person to review your personal statement? So if you want to ask like a science professor who you might ask for a letter of recommendation from, or would it be too much to ask of them to review the personal statement?
That's a good question. So it depends on what you're asking them to review it for. So if you want to know if it's interesting, anybody can read it for you and tell you if it's interesting, right? Like it doesn't necessarily have to be someone who works at a medical school or who works in a university setting. You are only going to get feedback as good as the expertise that that person has about what you're trying to do, right? If I don't make macaroni and cheese and I never eat it, and then you ask me to give you feedback about your macaroni dish, I'm gonna be like, sure, great, it was fine. But like, I may not have parameters to be able to give you whether you really accomplished the goal of it. So I find that often professors can be great at giving you feedback around what you've shared. Like, what were your takeaways from this? Did you get a sense of my motivation? I can also have Esmeralda post I have a feedback rubric that I developed that's going to be published in my book. My book is coming out in November, but it's something that you can give to people with your personal statement that will guide how they're reading it, right? Like, what is it that they should be looking for? Is this genuine? Does it share insights? Is it showing characteristics rather than just telling? So I can send that to Esmeralda to send out to you. And then it's one of the like little graph things. It's going to appear in my book, or chart rather, in my book.
Do you have to have gone through some hardships or repression to have a strong statement?
No, I think that's a misnomer, that you have to endure something really hard or have some sort of personal tragedy to write about. I've even had applicants say really like, I know they don't mean it this way, but like, well, you know, I wish that I had like cancer or something, and then I could just write about some cool story. And I'm like, you don't mean that you wish that you had cancer to try and have something cool to write about for med school. But really, it's the meaning making. Like, I have read incredible personal statements that were about really simple stuff, right? I read one about a student who did street outreach in Chicago and worked a lot with people who were living on the streets. And just, it was all about like human stories. Like, what does a person with severe food allergies who's homeless do? How do they eat? Like, those are things that I just never thought about. And so she brought us like very up close and personal to some of the people that she had just worked with through the activities that she engaged and why they were important to her. I've read a personal statement about someone who had a lawn care business, you know, through high school, the things that they learned. I mean, it's really about the meaning and how that meaning is connected to who you are that makes something powerful. Because I've also read personal statements about global health, you know, all this fanciness, and they're garbage. Like, they don't actually tell me, like, why did you do that? You can't just be like, Dean Nakae, I went to insert foreign country here and helped insert underserved group here. And this was amazing. And medicine's great. And I just want to go save everyone. That doesn't really tell me who you are. It doesn't tell me why you did those things or why it's important. And most critically, it doesn't give me a sense of what's underneath that, your values. What are you bringing to the table? So you don't have to have flashy things. And I think sometimes even applicants think if they write about fancy stuff, then that's going to be enough. But we never let someone in, or the committee never makes a decision saying, well, wow, this person had this really impressive global health trip, we're going to let them in, right? It's always about the whole person. Who is this applicant and what they represent, and how have they shown us that? And what did their letter writers say about what they themselves claimed? What did they make meaning of the experiences they've engaged, and how did their experiences back up what they said were important to them?
Thanks. How about how long should a statement be?
So for the MCAS application, your statement is 5,300 characters. So about a page and a half, single spaced. So you don't have a lot of space to tell your story. I think that's challenging for some people. Some people are like okay, I said it all and I'm only at 3/4 of a page. I don't have anything else to say. And some people are like, I'm at 5 pages and I don't know how I'm ever going to get it down to 5,300 characters. So it can be challenging no matter which camp you're in. But you definitely should, as you do your free write, use the word count so you get a sense of how much space you have. And in residency, by the way, when you all get to medical school and then you're applying for residency, I give everybody a page, because residency program directors do not read more than a page. So as my fourth years right now will tell you, I'm like pushing them to cut their ideas down to a page of, why do I love this specialty? Why am I going into it? What experiences have supported this motivation? What's my goal for myself, my vision for my career? You know, and you just have to keep writing personal statements forever. So that's also the important thing to recognize, is that you're going to be writing these forever, because then when you graduate and you get your job and you have to apply for a new job, they ask you for a statement of professional interest or a cover letter, which is essentially just a personal statement for why you want the job. So Esmeralda's laughing because she knows it's true. So you have to just keep writing them. Like that's just the nature of it, is learning how to connect who you are with what you're trying to do. And that gap is important to close, so we know about the maturity and the authenticity, and also just your confidence in your path, right? Because everybody wants to choose someone that they know is going to want to be there today, tomorrow, and beyond.
You mentioned not to detail too many experiences because you may risk having important details of the experiences. How many would be appropriate to include?
So I think it kind of just depends on what kind of lens you want to use. So for this student that talked about people she met in street outreach, I think she talked about 6 people total, but her whole theme was up close and personal with people and their stories, and ways that she wanted to achieve that through medicine, right? Meeting people where they are through medicine. But you might have an encounter that you detail clinically and talk about that, and then maybe something from your childhood or something from an interaction with your family. Just kind of depends on how it fits together with your theme. And again, it's good to get feedback about if you don't have time to really address or set up the story. Some of the writing exercises also, you know, getting right to the important part of the detail. What are the important details about this patient? Do we need to know that they arrived on a bike? Do they need to know, like, what aspects of the details of the story are critical to how it fits in with your theme and your motivation? So I don't really have a no more than X number, because every rule I ever give about personal statements, some applicant will break it and break it very successfully. And that's how I know that that applicants are really engaging this well, is because it's really about you and how you authentically come to, this represents me on paper. You know, if you had 15 minutes to stand in front of a committee and talk to them about why you want this, that should be what's on your personal statement. You should feel that you've birthed something when you're done with it, right? If you just wrote it and you're like, all right, I think it's done, let's apply, you probably didn't do it right. Like, you should be scraping the vestiges of your soul to really ask, like, why am I doing this? Why is this important to me? And if you do that, you will interview better. Because when somebody says, Esmeralda, why do you want to be a physician? You're gonna be like, oh, I've been thinking about this for a long time. Like, I have scraped the innermost, you know, corners of my soul to answer this question about why do I care so deeply about medicine. It will just improve your application from, you know, submission all the way through.
Would talking about how you want to improve aspects of the medical field be appropriate?
Yes, I definitely think you can talk about what you want to improve, and especially if this comes from things that you've directly observed around the way that care is delivered, or how patients move through a clinic, or any of these directly observable experiences that you might be having. I think it's okay to say, one way we could do this better would be this. I think that's completely open. That's very different than saying that you think that doctors don't do this right or don't do that right, or the reason why people in my family died is because we had this doctor that never listened to us, right? So you have to be careful, because you don't want to offend the person who's reading it. But I think you can bring great ideas in from your personal experience around, again, that's part of your vision for why you're going into medicine and what you're hoping to accomplish as a physician.
Would talking about a sorority or fraternity be appropriate? Would being in part of these groups, would you look down upon it, or how is it viewed?
I think it depends. You have to give us a little bit of background about that group. And again, how is it related to your motivation? Like, if you've done a lot of service and outreach and, you know, community work through your fraternity or sorority, then that might be relevant to some of the experiences that you want to share. I didn't participate in Greek life or fraternity or sorority when I was in college, so I tend to not know as much about it, and maybe a lot of times what ends up in the news about fraternities and sororities tends to be kind of negative, and what's in popular culture tends to be negative. So you have to really teach the reader about that experience so that we can understand why it's important to you and why it's related to your motivation for medicine. Certainly people put that as AMCAS experiences all the time, that they served as the VP or membership chair or philanthropy chair, and it's good to have one sentence describing, you know, blah, 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 fraternity's mission is to, you know, support student academic growth and, you know, help communities thrive. And, you know, just give a little bit of a preamble to what the purpose of it is. But it certainly, you know, isn't going to go against you if you describe it in your own terms and tell us why it was that you engaged it, right? So you're not going to put, you know, this is the biggest party, for, you know, fraternity or sorority on campus, and I joined because of the epic, you know, parties and blah, blah, blah. You're going to, you know, try and include information about why that was relevant to supporting you in this journey.
And then it kind of relates to that is, does it have to be a medical experience that you talk about?
No, that's a really good question. So you don't have to write about something medical in your personal statement, right? Because this is who you are and why you want to go into medicine. So certainly we need to understand that you know what you're getting into, and we need to understand why your identity has come to this professional point where you're asking to be a physician. But you can write about challenges, you can write about you know, a process. I mean, I had a student write about being a nutrition coach, and he talked about before he developed a condition where he struggled with his weight, he didn't feel that, he thought that he was a good coach. And after he actually went through an autoimmune disease where he struggled to keep his weight off, all of a sudden he literally felt like he was his own patient and was really like so close to some of the struggles personally of how hard it was to manage those things, and realized that he had stood in judgment of many of the patients. Even though at the time he didn't believe he was really judging them, he realized in hindsight that he was. And so it was really about his own, you know, journey of learning self-compassion and compassion for the people that he was working with. And it wasn't about a patient, or it wasn't about a physician or anything like that. So it really just depends on what's important to you. Some people really make it very autobiographical and talk about their families and experiences of their families. I've had people talk about cultural events and how they celebrate them, and ways that that relates to the way that communities connect, and how their vision for medicine is around that connection. I mean, there's an endless array of possibilities that come from your authentic pursuits that you can write about.
About how many people should read your personal statement?
Like before, how many people should you get feedback from?
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody needs to send it to one really honest friend that will tell you if it sucks or not. I wrote a blog for personal statements called Tough Love for Your Personal Statement. Advice from a med school admissions dean. It's on, I think if you just Google like Tough Love for Your Personal Statement, you'll find it. But my original title for that was How to Write a Personal Statement That Doesn't Suck. And my chair at the time was like, really like the creativity of that title, Sunny, but we're not gonna print suck in an academic blog. And I was like, fair enough. Okay, we'll find a different title that, you know, more conveys the idea of what I'm trying to say. But I definitely think that you need to get, again, the feedback around, is it engaging? What did you learn about me? So it's good to give it to someone that doesn't know you. Like if you have a friend of a friend and they have a friend of a friend and they sort of know of you, but they've never met you, give it to them and say, what did you learn about me from this? And they might say, I learned you really liked hockey. And you'll be like, not what I was going for, dang it, right? So like just get someone's impression of what are you communicating with your personal statement. And then some people that can offer you some critique. I know Esmeralda and her colleague Jackie are great at just offering some of that critique, you know, helping you dig deeper and ask those reflective questions is really important. Peer review process is good too. But as much as you need to engage until you feel that it really represents who you are and why you want to be a physician.
And you'll get your first critique with your mentor. So they definitely don't know you. They should know a little bit about you now, but yeah, that'd be your good first draft. Can you give some examples of themes for a personal statement?
I usually, when I do this with med students who are applying to their residency, I ask them to talk about kind of what their important experiences are. So they sort of begin by writing, and I have a pre-write that I'll send to Esmeralda to send to you guys as well. It just sort of takes you through some questions you can ask yourself. But I think you should begin by identifying some of your most important experiences and why are they important and how have they shaped you. And then from there, you might develop a theme of resilience. You might, like one of my students who's actually an OB now, she's Native Hawaiian. She took a course through her college on learning how to navigate a Native Hawaiian boat, I forgot what it's called, but there's a word for it, by stars. And the end of the course was that you had to actually take the boat out on the water in the dark and do the navigation by the stars and come back. And so she had this theme of guiding lights, like people in our life who have guided us towards our journey, like these people that as we check in, we know we're on the right path. And where in her path she felt affirmed by experiences or people that she was on the right track. So she used a really great theme that was personal to her identity as a Native Hawaiian woman, that was personal to an experience that she'd engaged, but that also worked to help her go in and out of the other experiences in healthcare, Actually, this student talked about the birth of her daughter as a moment where she knew that that was part of the journey that she wanted to go on with women as an OB. So lots of it could be a theme that's multifaceted like that, where it's kind of based on one of your experiences, and then you create, sometimes it can be journeys or belonging or finding a sense of home, creating those connections or overcoming barriers. I mean, there's lots of things, but what makes those themes real are, again, your experiences and who you are that comes in underneath those things and really makes them come alive. And for Namea's personal statement, it could be nobody else in the whole wide world's personal statement. And that's what made it phenomenal. And that's what made people say, we want to meet this person. This candidate sounds amazing and sounds like they really know why this is important to them. And they're bringing their whole self, to our medical school class. And now she practices in Hawaii. So, good story for Namea.
Does the committee read everyone's personal statements or applications filtered out based on statistic or their stats before the committee gets to experiences and personal statements? I guess, how is it reviewed?
Yeah, it's different at every school. So all schools will tell you that they do some form of holistic review, and I think that's universally pretty true. Some schools will screen by numbers and make a cut and really only consider applicants above the cut. And then some schools will prioritize by numbers and try to read everything. So there's really nothing that you can do about when you submit an application to a school, what's going to happen to your file. So you really want your personal statement to be strong. If it's going to be read as part of the screening process, you want it to be strong. If it's going to be read as part of the interview prep and it's going to, give the interviewer a clue as to who they might meet, you want it to be strong. So at no phase where it could be used, do you want it to be a weak aspect of your application, right? So it can come up in committee. Often when committee members present candidates for final decision, they will include particularly powerful excerpts of writing from the student to give them, like, in the student's own words, here's how he describes XYZ, or here's how she talks about blah, blah, blah. If there's something really powerful from the personal statement, often committee members will quote it to the group, and it can make a big difference in completing the picture of you. And again, if it's authentic and it's affirming of the other areas of your application, it can be a really, really great tool. So a good personal statement can only help you. If you write a bad one, it may not hurt you at certain phases. It may not ever matter. But if it's something that you can control that will increase your consideration and potentially help you get to your goal, then it's worth putting in the time to do it and to do it well.
How does writing about being a disadvantaged student reflect and factor into the admissions process?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for disadvantaged statements, they're used differently at different schools. So on the ONCAS application, there is a question. It's yes or no, do you consider yourself a disadvantaged student? And then they will give you the criteria of what that means. Socially, educationally, economically, I think disadvantaged. So you just write yes or no. And then you get, I believe it's like 1,100 characters, or maybe it's 1,300, a character limited box to describe how you're disadvantaged or why you believe you meet the criteria to be disadvantaged. So because that's self-report, schools use it in different ways. Some schools don't really use it in a structural way where they don't separate people who say yes from people who say no. Some schools use it in a really holistic way where we might read it and consider that as part of like a distance traveled. It doesn't automatically mean anything at various schools depending on what you write. People can include that they're disadvantaged because they went to a bunch of different schools growing up because they grew up in the military. They can put that they're disadvantaged because they suffer from a chronic illness that's disrupted their progress in school. They can put they're disadvantaged because they've struggled with immigration status and have been undocumented for certain portions of their childhood and or adult life. Like there's lots of reasons why someone might list that they're disadvantaged. Your personal statement and your disadvantage statement should not conflict each other, in that if you're claiming certain aspects of hardship in your life, and then you write your personal statement about, like, sailing around the world in a yacht, then we're like, So we want to make sure that they go together. But you also do not have to include elements of your background as a disadvantaged applicant in your personal statement. So for example, many undocumented students I work with, their status or their experience as an undocumented person may not be the thing that's front and center in why they really want to do medicine. They may not want to write about that as central to their motivation. It might be the work that they've done with a particular community, like say a homeless community, or working as a doula and helping women, bring children into the world. They might want that to be more central. So they could still put in their disadvantage statement just the facts around elements of why they consider themselves disadvantaged, and write their whole personal statement about the passionate part and the part that they really want to talk about and spend time talking about. So you get to choose how you frame your writing between your disadvantage statement and your personal statement. And I don't recommend writing the disadvantage statement in a essay kind of way. Like, don't open your disadvantage statement with by describing like the floor of the room you lived on. There were boxes just like I grew up this, like it should be very factual, very reporting based. Just stating, if you were on public assistance, or, the factual reasons why you were disadvantaged, not like a, big story or some creative poem or something in that area.
How do you handle the diversity question other than mentioning your race or cultural heritage?
Yeah, so a lot of schools ask the big diversity question. I think we should actually ask an anti-racism question instead. I think we should be asking people to what extent they've engaged and incorporated anti-racism into their lives. That would be much more useful than diversity. But people answer the diversity question authentically. So if you're applying to my school and you say I'm diverse because I play the cello, then I will let that mean whatever it means to committee members, and they may decide, yes, that's valid and interesting and bring something to our class, or they may decide, that's an interesting way to answer the question. That wasn't what we were looking for, right? So you really, again, can only be who you are on the application. You can write about your race or ethnicity if that's relevant and that's something that you feel like you bring. You can talk about experiences or communities that you've worked with. You can talk about skills that you have. So not everybody who has a language skill shares that cultural or ethnic background of that language. So because you speak Spanish or Russian doesn't necessarily mean that you're from a Spanish speaking country, or that you're from Spanish, a Latinx ethnicity, or, same thing with Russian. So you'll definitely want to use it as an opportunity to talk about yourself and what you bring to the class. Some people even write about their background, like I'm an engineer, or I was an art history major, and a way that they think that adds something interesting or important to the perspective. So we think about diversity as experiences and attributes, like a combination of those things to help us understand what you're bringing to the class. Yeah.
Would talking highly about a doctor be okay instead of talking negatively?
Yeah, I really enjoy reading statements where applicants have good takeaways that help them understand the role of a physician, and they've had a particular role model who's great. One essay I read years ago talked about a student that worked with a cardiologist, and she talked about how exhausting it must have been to be available to patients so much, and that always, understanding that, yes, this is your 50th phone call of the day, but this is the patient's first and only phone call from the provider. And so every call was made with this like conscientiousness around how important this news was to that patient, how important, like it wasn't a checklist. It wasn't just, going through the motions. And the student really described how much they admired the presence of the physician and what they brought to how much they showed that they loved their patients by being there. That was really great insight from being mentored by a good physician that let us know, well, this applicant really sees how important the role of a physician is, really sees the demands that are placed on a physician, right? Rather than the applicant saying, I know what it's like, I've watched doctors do this, that, the other. They told us about what they've observed a physician that they admired and worked with did. So again, you want to always kind of bring the focus back to your motivation. So not just, let me describe the most amazing doctor I worked with and tell us all about them. And then again, we'll be looking to invite them for a medical school interview, even though they're already doctors, right? So, but I definitely, it's fine to talk about, what you might have learned from a physician mentor or someone that you admire.
How do you handle questions that ask about your goals and future? Do you mention that we're interested in a particular field? How do you handle the why this medical school question?
Yeah, so Questions to ask about your goals in future, I would just be honest. And this is again where if you've done your homework and you're applying to medical schools that you feel are going to help you meet your goals, right? Like, for example, if you want to be a nuclear medicine specialist and you want to be an astronaut that goes to the moon and you want to be the first MD that goes to the moon and you apply to UCR School of Medicine, we are going to wish you the best and probably not interview you because nothing in our education or school infrastructure would really help you achieve those goals, right? Like we probably aren't the right medical school. We exist to increase access to care in research and patient care and all for underserved communities in Southern California, specifically the IE. So you have to look at what your goals are. So hopefully if you've applied to the right schools in the first place, you have no problem talking about, hey, I see myself in primary care. I want to be a pediatrician, or right now I'm interested in surgery. I think it's okay to talk about where you see yourself and what you hope to get out of medicine. Hopefully you'll find alignment with that, with the school. Do give some thought to the school's mission, the programs that they have, so that you could choose something that's within the goals that you have that you think lines up with what the school is looking for, right? So if you could choose between three things and one is really aligned with the school's mission, we'll talk about the one that's more aligned with their mission, because that's a way in the secondary application that we're trying to assess whether we have what you need to thrive, whether we can provide the educational platform for you to meet your goals. You can mention that you're interested in a particular field as long as you do it in an open-ended way and as long as it's informed by experiences, right? So if you've been a medical assistant in a pediatrics office and you say that you're interested in pediatrics and this is why, that makes sense to us. If you just say, I watch a lot of crime shows and I want to be a forensic pathologist, that makes a little less sense to us, right? So I think lived experiences and how that comes together to complete the picture of you is how you want to use your writing. And the why this medical school question, if you've done your homework about why you applied to that school, you should be able to say how the goals that you hope to achieve in medicine will be able to be furthered by that school. So if you're coming to UCR School of Medicine, for example, you might talk about your interest in preventive care. You might talk about your interest in public health. The way that our LACE program is going to give you a lot of exposure to ambulatory care environments, helping patients establish, medical homes and better continuities of care, all those things. So I think you should, it's silly of medical schools, but if we can think of a medical school as a person, they're really saying, well, why do you want to date me? Like, tell me why I'm so great, right? Like it's a bit annoying, but every medical school in their secondary wants a love letter from the applicant to describe to them, UCR, this is why I applied to you. This is why I love you. This is why you and I should get married. Like, we want you to convince us as an applicant that you know who we are as a school and who you are as an applicant and that you see those things going together, right? So we're asking you to do a little bit of the work for us and helping us understand how our school is going to help you meet your goals.
So that's it in the questions on the chat. My question to you, Sunny, is I know a lot of our students, specifically in the mentorship, not all of them will be applying for medical school right now in this round, but I've gotten a lot of questions regarding shadowing and how critical that is. What are your thoughts and what are some advice that you can give to folks that are here in the IE to find someone to shadow or physician shadow?
Yeah, so I think a lot of shadowing opportunities are going to be pretty limited, and medical schools understand that access to clinical experiences is much more limited than it's been. So it's okay if you do not have opportunities to shadow. You can include on your application that you may have had an opportunity and you weren't able to do that because of the pandemic. On the secondary application, there's usually a question of like, tell us what you, anything else you want the committee to know, or they might specifically be asking in the future schools, how has your preparation been impacted by COVID-19? So I wouldn't worry that you're going to be disqualified because this is happening across pre-medical preparation nationwide because of all of the precautions around coronavirus. So I would get some exposure to medicine through reading. There are a lot of really great books written by physicians that can help give you a little bit of a perspective around what the clinical environment is like, or the perspective of doctors. Some good ones are How Doctors Think. I think that one, I can't remember who the author is on that one. I'm going to say it's Jerome something, but How Doctors Think is one. Attending Children is one that's written by a pediatrician. She talks about her journey as a medical student and then a resident and then an attending physician. There's one called Final Exam by Pauline Chen. There's one called What I Learned in Med School that was written by medical students and different vignettes about medical students. So if you just look up like, you know, books written by doctors, I know Atul Gawande has several, you know, complications, and you can try to sort of do your own self-study to get a picture of what these healthcare environments are like, what some of the challenges are, things that you may not be able to see in person. It'll benefit your preparation. It's a curious and fun way to learn about medicine. Even if you have the opportunity to shadow, I do recommend reading. And then if somebody asks you, you know, you weren't able to shadow, you can say, you know what, I was limited because of coronavirus. Here's some things that I did to try and explore this for myself and really get a strong idea of what medicine is like and of the challenges that medicine is currently facing. So engage in your own self-study. And I'll try to put some of the names in the chat.
Any questions from anyone else? You can either use the little hand function or unmute yourself.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned to avoid weird topics in our personal statement, and I'm having trouble. Like, what does that mean? Like, what is weird? like, like, can you help me understand? Like, I know you mentioned to stay away from gory subjects, but what is like weird?
So this wasn't in someone's personal statement, but it was like in their experiences of their application. Like they mentioned that they play like Magic the Gathering card game or something, and like described how they played this game with their friends, and they were like a squirrel club at school, and like there were just several things that just seemed like just really odd. Like there's just a fine line between, oh, that's really quirky and unique, like, oh, I collect stamps and stamps aren't even popular anymore, but isn't that fun, to like just maybe that person's a little socially strange, right? Because we're going to make inferences about the experiences that you choose. I'm trying to think if I can think of another example of something that's weird. It's kind of one of those things where I don't know it until I read it. And then when I do, like I post a lot on my Facebook, like your friendly neighborhood admissions dean, and I post like things that applicants do. And sometimes I post really heartwarming things, but a lot of times I'll post like things applicants do and just like, you know, don't do this. And my former students just love it because they're like, the friendly dean is back and it's so funny. So I posted one about someone who winked at me in an interview, and I never would have thought to include, right? Like that's something, Marnice, that like you'd be like, I would never tell someone not to do that. But once they did, I was like, oh, that's a thing. Don't do that. Like that's a weird thing, right? So I can't think of a specific topic, but like it could be like the topic is super weird or it's not related to medicine enough. I did see an essay one year that was like all alliterative. It was like perfect people. It was like all of these like exactly words that all started with the same letter. And then the next sentence was all things that started with the next same letter. And that was an example of something that was just way weird. And it was distracting. So like the delivery of it just really took away from the content, because we were like, look how many words in a row this person is like listing that start with this letter, and we weren't really paying attention to the content. So I hope that helps kind of answer your question. So don't be paranoid that you're going to write something that's weird. You probably won't. It's just, you know, or have a friend that tells you, hey, this is weird.
Thank you.
There was one question on the chat. What extracurricular activities are more highly regarded in the application process? Should we have more clinical experience? Is it better to have other activities that are outside of medicine that shape our social experiences?
Yes, 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 and yes. I think that your preparation, it should be, I mean, this is really a lot of what my book is about too, is I would like people to focus really heavily on what kind of person do I need to be ready to be someone's doctor, not what sorts of things can I do to get into medical school, because those things should really overlap nicely, but sometimes they get pretty spread apart because there's so much out there around, well, you have to do this and you have to do that, and med schools want to see this and medical schools want to see that. So I think that you should begin your experiences with passion. What do you care about? And why is it important to you? And then choose activities that will help you enact your passion or action for those things that you care about. Ask yourself what your gifts are. What do you have to give? And how can you use the talents and the resources that you have to make the lives of other people better? So one of the applicants that I was talking with a couple weeks ago was saying, like, you know, I really like to read and I speak 3 languages and I, you know, I'm able to pay attention to things for a really long time. So I don't mind, like, you know, being on my computer for long periods of time. I have the ability to focus for long periods of time. And so we talked about like his family background with immigrant parents and said, well, what about like teaching classes online? There's like classes that people take to try to pass the citizenship exam. There's classes people take to try to do the TOEFL. I'm like, what about like teaching and like developing some coursework or studying with people? Or how could you, if you like to read, how about engaging a reading where you might be able to go to a school and read to kids during a breakfast program, or read to people who are on hospice or who are in memory care facilities, right? So lots of ways to think about, like, what do I love to do and how can I like take the things I love and go and bring that love for those things into someone else's life and make them better. That really is, like, in my book, I call it the secret sauce, the secret ingredient. That really is the secret ingredient, because it's bringing who you really are and the things you care about into your preparation. Yes, you have to know what you're getting into as far as medicine. Yes, we do need to know that medicine is your choice to the exclusion of all other things. But there's so many passionate things that you can pursue that are related to medicine or not related to medicine. I do think that having some exposure or idea of the clinical environment is important, because that involves the exploration of, do I like the healthcare environment? Do I like the kind of people that are going into healthcare? Do I see myself, you know, dealing with sick people all day? I don't really like sick people. So that wouldn't be my choice, right? Like, I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and I volunteered at a community hospital for 2 years in middle school. And I was like, I don't like this environment at all. And I don't like sick people, and I don't do bodily fluids, especially not other people's bodily fluids. So I was like, I'm out. Like, my ideal day at work does not include people coming to me, asking me to look at their rash or, you know, just examining their butt. Like, that's just not my thing. So on the education side, I love it. And I love encouraging that. And I love working on policies and working on justice, and was able to sort of find my niche. And it's okay if you start exploring, if you realize, I don't really like this, I'd like to do something else. There's a million things that improve the health and lives of others that don't involve directly doing a medical intervention. Everything from nutrition and public health and other allied health professions areas, to teaching and all sorts of community activism that's political or civic or faith-based. I mean, so much that we can do to engage the world around us.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I was wondering if you have, it's off topic to personal statements, but I was wondering if you have any advice when it comes to affording like primary applications. And talking to my mentor, there's another secondary application that you have to pay for as well. So I was wondering if you have any advice on going about paying for it, and if you know of like any organizations that provide scholarships for stuff like that.
Yeah, so through the AMC, there's a program that's called the Fee Assistance Program, and you can apply for it online. And it provides 20 MCAS applications for free and a reduced MCAT, as well as some MCAT preparation materials at free or reduced cost. It's normally 300% of the federal poverty level for household size. This year, because of the pandemic, it's 400%. So there, if you previously applied like within the last 6 months and you were denied, you can resubmit. There is a calculator, like a worksheet on the FAP page that will tell you if you're likely going to be approved, if you want to do that before you go and gather the tax information and the verification that's required. If you do receive what we call the FAP, if you get the FAP, it will be indicated on your application that you've received it. So when we download your AMCAS, we'll see that you're a waiver recipient. So many schools will automatically waive your secondary or supplemental fee, or reduce your secondary or supplemental fee if you have it. Some schools will not automatically do it, but you can contact them and say, I did receive a waiver for my primary application. Could I please request a waiver for my secondary, and then see what they say. So hopefully that helps with the cost. I know a lot of medical schools do not want cost to be a barrier for students. This year it's interesting because many interviews are going to be remote, virtual, so that will eliminate a lot of the travel costs. So it may be advantageous in some ways this year that all of a sudden equity is coming into focus much more around people being able to interview via Zoom or teleconference, when I think that was really universally disliked before the pandemic. But now we just have no choice. So we're doing our MMIs virtually this year.
I don't know if I just didn't hear it, but can you apply for that at any time, or do you have to, for the fee assistant program, can I apply to that now as a second year college student, or do I have to wait till I'm about to apply to medical school?
It's a good question. Yeah, so it's good for 18 months from the time that you get accepted. So you can, if you, at the point where you think you're going to start studying for the MCAT and want to register for the MCAT, you'll want to apply, because it only works going forward. So if you register for the MCAT and you pay the full fee and then you get the FAP, they're not going to give you a refund for the part that you paid for that you wouldn't have had to pay for with the waiver. So as soon as you think that you're going to be looking at MCAT registration, you should apply, then you'll have it for 18 months. It goes all the way through till MCAT and application, and then you can reapply for it once it expires and receive it again.
Can you reapply as many times, or is
I
it
believe
like
so. I believe so. Yeah, it's just they have it expire so that they make sure that it's still current. It used to be that you'd have it for a year. They'd have like a date where it opened and then they'd give waivers and then it closed. But now they've changed it to it's kind of rolling. So it's good for 18 months, kind of on a rolling basis. So.
Any other questions?
Hi, I had a question. When it comes to personal protected information in our personal statements about, like, if you had a clinical setting and you're describing a patient, do we need to censor their names or any of their personal information from our personal statement?
Yes, so you do want to abide by all the HIPAA privacy laws when you're writing about a patient encounter, especially, sometimes in a small community. People may be able to deduce if they volunteer at the same place as you or something, what it is you're talking about. So you can change the name or the details. Again, is it relevant? Like, you could just say at one of our local hospitals in inland Southern California, or just at a local hospital or the hospital. Like, you may leave out certain details that would make it easy for the patient to be identifiable. But yeah, we should always attend to those privacy issues. Because a lot of people are going to be reading and have, be privy to your personal statement.
Hi, Dr. Nakae. I was just wondering, are we allowed to send you our personal statement for feedback, or is that not allowed?
I am so swamped right now that I really cannot universally invite everyone to send me their statements because I don't have time to do them. So, and I'm working with fourth years on the residency personal statements right now, but I will send the pre-write and the rubric to Esmeralda to share. Again, they're going to be published and kind of printed in my book. So I would ask that you guys not post them everywhere. But I'm happy to provide those resources, and then hopefully you can use the rubric with each other and let me know if it's useful in being able to further refine your personal statement.
And you will have your first draft due Monday to your mentor. So I'll try to get the rubric and all that information to you all this week. And your feedback, so your mentor will email me your personal statement with their feedback by Friday. And I can definitely also review it as well to give you some feedback too. So feel free to reach out. Just let some of you are in different stages. So some of you may not be applying right now, and that's okay. But I just wanted to have this activity for you so you start thinking about personal statements. Like Dr. Nakae mentioned, you will be writing personal statements basically forever. So it might as well get started now. And it works also for scholarships. If you want to apply for funding, assistance programs, you need to learn how to write a personal statement. So feel free to reach out to me if you need any support and give you some feedback, another set of eyes if you're applying for this cycle especially. And then Sunny just put in the chat when she'll be having her chats. So feel free to reach out to her. I know you're really busy. Any last questions before I end the meeting? Is starting your personal statement with a question appropriate?
Depends. I've seen statements start that way. I do think that you have to get right to your theme and kind of tell us where you're going, but I think it's okay to start with a question, particularly if it's very related to you and your experiences and your motivations. I think that's fine.
All right. Well, just a reminder, at 5 o'clock, Heidi has a website design workshop. So if you all are able to attend that, if you haven't attended yet, and then there's a lit review one later tonight at 9 o'clock. Thank you so much, Dr. Nakae, for your time. We
Nice to meet
appreciate
all of you. And Esmeralda, if you'll send me, like share the file with me from OneDrive,
Yeah,
then I'll get it and I'll have my son cut it and we'll put it on the channel. And people can
will do. Sounds good. Thank you all. We'll see you later
All right.
this week. Thank
Thank
you.
you.